Welcome to the Traders Help Desk online video collection. In this video I'm going to show you how to do a very quick scan using the THD tools for RadarScreen in TradeStation. They are also available for multi-charts in NinjaTrader, although we do not have the divergence indicators for NinjaTrader. Now, as you can see, I've got a 120-minute chart on top and I have a weekly chart on the bottom. Also have a radar screen over here on my left hand side where I have the THD ADX, the THD pull back to the SMA, the THD pull back to the ATR, and I also have easy money, which I will show you later. But the first thing I want to do is on the SMA in the ATR, because we are using stocks and stocks have varying prices. The first thing that I did was change the SMA in the ATR inputs so that highlight ticks 2 is set to 100. So that means when it gets 100 ticks away from the SMA, it will highlight the stock in gray. The same thing on the ATR. Now, some of these, if the price is real low, will be quite a distance from the ATR at 100 ticks. But I like to trade the higher price stocks because, of course, they have more volume. So overall, this would work for me. Now, this is the NASDAQ 100. It's just the standard list that is built into TradeStation. And what I'm going to do first is sort by the SMA and then by the ATR later. The reason is I want to go in on a 120-minute chart. And of course, as all of my students know, I believe that the SMA and the ATR offer the first level of support and resistance. So what I want to do after I've inserted my list is double click on ticks 2. So I'm going to double click there and you can see that it sorts, and the first one that you would come to would be GMCR. So I'm going to click on it and you can see that it is right at the SMA. Now the next thing I want to do is look down, because the weekly chart, if I want to trend trade, I want to be in the direction of the weekly. And as you can see, the ADX is telling me that it is trending upwards, but it's also overbought. So I know if I wanted to go into a long position here, it would be incorrect because I would be going against the weekly, because if this magenta peak comes in, it will go down to about 30.56, which would stop me out. Not a trade I would want to take. So let's go to the next one, which is Siri. And you can see these are highlighted in gray, and I'm choosing them by the ones that are closest to. And negative tells me that it is above the SMA. So when I go to Siri, I can see that this is above the SMA by 18 ticks. Okay, so this one I would want to see it come back and touch the ATR like it did over here. That would have been a better trade here. But right now it's not at the SMA and it's actually 18 ticks away from the SMA. So I wouldn't want to enter that one now because it's a very low value stock. Let's go to the next one, which is Flex. And as you can see, this is quite a distance off of the SMA. And again, this is because I set the highlight ticks to 100. And since this is a low value stock, it's sitting off of the SMA. The one thing I would note though is that you have a bright blue here on the weekly. But the problem is it's coming back to this SMA. Is actually doing it on decreasing volume. So that tells me that it's probably going to pull back. The fact that this has a flat ADX line right now, we could actually see a peak come in on Flex next week. So it's not one I would want to be trading right now. The next one would be FSLR. And as you can see, this one is actually closer to the slow moving average. and that is because it is a higher price stock. So I would be looking at this and looking to see if we had diverging volume on the seller side because we are above the SMA. Now, ironically, this is one I may want to go into later if this magenta peak comes in, and the reason is we are at the ATR and the buyers are not responding. Anytime the buyers are not responding, that means that price will go down. And on the weekly, we could potentially have a magenta peak next week, which means the price would come down to $24.76. This is what we would call our Buddha trade. Once the magenta peak comes in here, we look for price to be at the ATR or the SMA, and that gives us a Buddha trade. So we want to continue down, and let's look at TIVA, which is 5 ticks away from the SMA. Now this one, if you were to take a long position here because it's showing long divergence, then you would be going against your weekly. This is not one I would even be interested in as you're going against the weekly, and it does not have a magenta peak. Totally different when it has a magenta peak in there. So the next one I would want to look at would be MXIM. You can see this is right at the slow moving average. There's no magenta peak down here. So we've had divergence on the seller side. So if this were to close above the SMA, this would be potentially be an entry for me. And the next one will be Microsoft, MSFT. Again, this one you will be going against your weekly. That's not a good idea at all. The next one is EA. And again, you can see this is at the ATR over on the weekly chart. You can see you've had divergence on the seller side. So if this were to close above the SMA, I would probably be interested in that one. XLNX. Okay, again, you can see you've got a nice ADX on the weekly chart. And what I would want to see is divergence on the seller side. As you can see right now, the sellers are actually increasing and the buyers are not responding. This tells me that we may get a magenta peak potentially on the weekly chart. Not a trade I would want to be in. The next one is X-ray. We're 20 ticks away from the slow moving average. You are seeing blue in the weekly, but it's dark blue, telling you that the momentum is potentially slowing down. You also have divergence on the buyer side. So this is one that I would want to see it pull back some towards the SMA, potentially the ATR, before I would even consider an entry on that one. Then we have NVDA. Now you can see these are positive numbers, so that's telling me that the SMA is above price. And on this one, you have dark blue here, and you have a divergence along the buyers. So this potentially has the potential to go down as it stands right now. They are testing for buyers, and buyers have not responded. So we could potentially see another down move on NVDA. The next one would be VRSN. And this one is oversold at the moment. However, you've almost pulled back here to the ATR. You can see that the buyers have not responded. So to me, this is going to be an entry into a short position. Now, what I would want to do is see the magenta peak here. I would want to see it pull more towards the SMA in the ATR. Must do it on diverging volume on the buyer side. And if it does, I would be in this one. The next one to look at is Yahoo. As you can see, now this is a scenario that you've already got the magenta peak on the weekly, and it is a blue magenta peak because it was rising. So this one should pull back to about 1807. As you can see, as it pulled back to the ATR on the 120, it did so on diverging volume. So this is one I would at least expect it to come back and test 1889. So this is one I would really look at first thing Monday morning. The next one would be NTAP. And again, you see this has made a blue magenta peak down here, which tells us it should pull back to the ATR down here. So this is not ready for an entry yet, and this would actually be a long entry if it occurs, because as it stands right now, I would expect it to pull back to about 32 on that one. Let's see what else we have here. We have PAYX at 45. This is really not one I would be interested in right now. I would want it to be more at the SMA. And then we have, BBY. Again, this is not as close to the SMA as what I would want it to be. I would want it to be closer to the SMA, which coincides with the ATR right now. So I would wait on this one. And then we have Shield. Again, Shield is about 81 ticks away from the ATR and the SMA actually. And what I would be looking at is a very nice pullback here before I even thought about entering this one. And then the last one is AKAM. Now this one has just pulled back almost to the ATR. And as it stands right now, the sellers are increasing. So this one very well may go down. I just don't like the ADX on the weekly time frame on that one. Now, this was using the SMA. So let's go and let's do a search on the stocks that are pulling back to the ATR. We have LLTC. You can see it's right on the ATR. You are going in the direction of the weekly. So this is one that I would be looking at first thing Monday morning because you're already seeing signs of divergence. It's right at the ATR, which gives you a very, very low risk entry point. Let me go ahead and sort according to ticks on this. And again, you just double click on pullback ATR. Okay, we have Dale, which is 10 ticks away from the ATR. And again, the one thing you want to make sure of is that you are going in the direction of this ADX on the weekly time frame. And as you can see, you've already had divergence here. And this one actually pulled back to the ATR on this bar. So if I had been trading this, I would have already been in at the open the next morning, which was 1088. And let me take this and pull it over here so it's easier for me to see it. We also have AMAT, and this one is about 14 ticks away from the ATR, so it would have to be closer than that. WCRX, and again, this is very dependent on the stock price as to whether you take it at, for example, 10 ticks or 20 ticks. It really depends on the stock price. Now this one has already pulled back to the ATR and actually flipped the ATR on the weekly. You did have divergence at the close of this bar, so there is a potential there. to me, I would be late coming in on that one. And then we have VOD. And again, this is one I would probably put on my watch list, but from looking at the weekly down here, I would expect it to flip the ATR because we're approaching the ATR on increasing volume. That's usually indicative that it will go up. So what I would want to see is a pullback all the way to the ATR, do so on diverging volume, and then I would enter a long position. The next one is Flex, which we looked at because it was at the SMA as well. And this one would be on my watch list because I expect this to pull back to the ATR now because we're potentially getting a magenta peak, which is what we want to see. If the magenta peak comes in, it pulls back to the ATR on diverging volume on the seller side, then I would be long, especially because you've got a nice increasing ADX on the weekly chart. The next one is Cisco. Again, I would want this to be closer to the ADX, and only then would I enter that one. CMCSA. Now this one actually was at the ATR on Friday. So this is the one I would be interested in. You do have a blue ADX down here. You've had diverging volume on the seller side. So this is one that's probably going to pop back up. MU. And this one again is very far from the ATR. You do see the weekly is telling you that it is going into an uptrend. And this is one I would wait for the magenta peak, then a pullback to the ATR, and only then when I enter. The next one is HSIC. Now this one is at the ATR. You have to make sure that it's doing it on diverging volume. This one, instead of diverging volume, is actually increasing volume on the seller side. Not one I would even think about taking. Then we have LINTA. This one is going to get a magenta peak. After the magenta peak, that would be a great setup for me to go long. But you have to have the magenta peak and the pullback to the ATR. SYMC. And again, this one we're seeing high ADX values. We are potentially going into an uptrend, but I would want to see the magenta peak pull back to the ATR on diverging volume. That would give me my entry. SPLS. This one is too far away from the ATR, and again, this goes to stock price more than anything. The weekly is actually showing you not to take a long right now because you're at the ATR on the weekly chart and it's doing it on diverging volume. So this is telling me it's probably going to go back down. MRVL. This one, you would need to see a magenta peak and a retracement to the ATR. It's not there yet. And you would be going against the weekly, although as volume is approaching the ATR, it's doing so on an increase in volume. Now this one very well may be a good setup. If it moves higher, then makes a magenta peak, comes back to the ATR, then I would be interested in it. CA, you're going against the weekly as it stands right now, so just right off the bat I'm not interested in it. And also you potentially could have a magenta peak. Now when this approaches the magenta peak, when this approaches the ATR after the magenta peak, then I would relook at it. Okay, NWSA. Again, you've just had a magenta peak. Now this is a strong one on the weekly, so this is one I would be watching for the pullback to the ATR. I know right now it's 40 ticks away, so this is one that would be on my watch list for this coming week, because as you can see, you're already getting the diverging volume here. So it just needs to pull back a little bit more, and then I would have an entry. Oracle. You've got a strong ADX on the weekly telling you this is a strong uptrend. I would want to see it pull back more to the ATR, and once it does so on diverging volume, then I would enter. SIAL. You can see that it is at the ATR already. You've got a very strong weekly chart. So this is one I would potentially be watching. We don't have any diverging volume. That is your issue at the current time. BRCM. You've got a nice ADX down here. The one thing that I would worry about would be the diverging volume. That tells me it's probably going to bounce back down before it continues up, which is also supported on the 120. Because you're potentially going to get a magenta peak on this 120, which again will cause it to pull back to the ATR. INTC. This is not one I would be interested at the moment, because I think we can get a magenta peak from the looks of it here, which will cause this to pull back to the ATR, which is about 50 cents away. So this one I would be just watching. You would also be going against your weekly right now. Life. And I'm going to have to stretch this one out. This one on the weekly isn't an uptrend. This one, the better pullback was actually here right after this magenta peak, but you can see the RSI is still showing an overbought area, so I would wait for another pullback. I don't think that one's ready on that pullback. STX. Okay, we are getting the pullback right now. You see the magenta dot has appeared. The weekly is just starting to trend. So I would be inclined to actually wait this one out because of that magenta dot there. There's just too many stocks to actually choose from. We do have this one, which we went over earlier. It's 5 ticks away from the ATR right here, and is doing so on diverging volume. So this is one I would want to look at on Monday morning. Okay, let's go to Siri, which is 6 ticks away. You can see that we have a strong ADX on the weekly telling us this is a pretty significant uptrend. But I would need this to come actually back closer to the ATR. You want it more like this one was, instead of where you have a lot of distance between the ATR. So I would be waiting on that one. And all of these others are pretty high values, so I'm going to skip over those. And let's go to FSLR. You can see that we are 18 ticks away. And we are also at the point where we could make a magenta peak on the weekly. So this is one I would be watching for next week. How about Starbucks? Starbucks again, you are at the ATR, but see how the ATR is above price, and this is telling us we are trending upwards on the weekly. So this is not one that I would want, even though you do have diverging volume on the highs. Nuon. This one we need to look at because it's at the ATR and the slow moving average, and it's doing so on diverging volume. So this actually supports a down move, but for the lowest risk possible, I would want to be right at the ATR on the 120, which it is not. PAYX. Now this one actually found support at the slow moving average on the weekly, which actually predicted this up bar. So this is not one I would want to be going short on. XLNX. And on this one, you're at the ATR here, but you're going against your weekly. Not something I would want to do. Now, the next way that we can actually do it is through the easy money indicator. We have a TIX 2 entry. So we could actually click on this one and then scroll back up at the top, and you'll see all of them that currently have been called in a position. Now this one is 4 ticks from an entry, and of course it's Siri. Now when I'm using this one, what I would want to do is actually make sure that I'm going in the direction of the weekly, unless we have had a magenta peak. If we've had a magenta peak, then you can actually take a reverse position. In this case, we have blue here. We don't have a magenta peak. It's not really considered to be overbought as well. So in this case, I would actually want this to be closer to the ATR. Now, if we put the easy money indicator on here, you can see why it is coming up with just a couple of ticks away. You can see this yellow line here. This is giving us our entry. So you can see over here we actually had it where it was at the yellow line. Now the only way that I will enter the easy money is if we have diverging volume. We had diverging volume on the next one, so you actually could have been in on this one. Now if we had had divergence prior to touching the yellow line, I would have been in as it touched the yellow line. But in this case, the divergence came at the end of this bar, so I would have been in here, and of course you can see you achieved your profit target. So let's go to the next one, Starbucks, which we just talked about. And again, you can see this is your yellow line, so it's telling you that you're 10 ticks away from this yellow line. It's calling a short position, and you have diverging volume. So this is one you could have an order sitting at the yellow line, a limit order. Now the problem with that is that you are going against your weekly, and as I said, you do not want to be going against your weekly chart unless you have a magenta peak. So again, just one I would not really want to take. We have NVDA. In this one, you have had divergence over on the weekly. You have not had divergence from the highs yet. In fact, I need another bar to actually give me divergence off the highs. So that's not one I would want to take. Any of them that have 99, either you're already in the trade or it is blocked. So we can also go back and look at LLTC. In this one, remember, this is the one that you were going with the weekly, and as this came back to the ATR, you did have diverging volume. You've already had 1, 2. This is the third easy money off of this one trade. Let's go to PCLN. PCLN, you would be going against your weekly. You would not want to take that one. And these are ones that actually you should already be in. That's the reason you have ticks 2 set at 0 here. Now on this one, you're in a downtrend on the weekly. You are also in a downtrend on the 120. you have had diverging volume. So this one you've actually been in since at least this point. Your entry was 41.40, your stop was 41.91, and your first target is 40.36. So this would be one that even trading with the weekly you would already be in it. The next one is XLNX. Of course, this one, as you can see, the weekly is telling you you're in an uptrend. This is telling you take a short position. You would not be in this one right now. Your next one is Yahoo. Now with Yahoo, you could actually already be in this one. You actually would have entered when it touched the yellow line because you already had volume divergence, so you would have been in at 1932. Your stop would be 1945. First profit target would be 1904. And the only reason that you would be able to take this one is because you do have the magenta peak over here on the weekly chart. So out of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 easy money trades, there's only 2 that you could potentially already be in. So this is really simple ways that you can actually screen for potential entries on stocks. Now we do teach all of this at the Master the Trade seminar and the advanced seminars.